My name is Kate Stewart, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. Thank you so much for joining us today for this special event to celebrate the National Day of Racial Healing. We are very proud to be one of many communities hosting these events that are happening all over the country today. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. We've been around for over 100 years. We respectfully acknowledge the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui people. The League of Women Voters is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion and strives to build relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through educational programs, voter outreach, and advocacy. And now I'm going to turn it over to one of our moderators who's going to be moderating tonight's event, Hershela Horton, who is a retired nurse, and she represented us in Tucson in the Arizona House of Representatives. Thank you so much, Hershela, for moderating tonight.
And thank you, Kate, for your opening remarks and for the introduction. I am a member of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson, and I'm the moderator for this program. As Kate stated, the League has been around for a long time, 102 years. We have spent that time first getting out the women's vote and informing them about candidates and issues. Now we do that for all. We believe in an informed electorate and work tirelessly for not only a citizen's right to vote, but also for them to be informed about issues and candidates. We sponsor countless forums toward this goal, and hence our invitation to you tonight to understand better our countries, our states, and our counties and cities' need for racial healing. The League operates with two foundational policies. One, the League shall not support or oppose any political party or any candidate. Two, the League is fully committed to ensure compliance in principle and in practice with the League of Women Voters Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion policy. Today is the 6th National Day of Racial Healing. We are all capable of bringing some form of racial healing into our homes, our communities, our places of work and worship, our schools, and certainly into our own lives. Thousands of people are or have come together on this 18th day of January to foster truth-telling, affirm a common humanity, inspire collective action, share our stories, further understand each other, and to challenge us toward a more just and equitable world. Tonight, in our belief that by sharing our experiences, a better world can be created in which we, and especially our youth and young adults, can be a new force for positive change. So we have invited a panel of our young people, ranging from high school to postgraduate school, to share with us their answers and views to the question, what does a National Day of Healing mean to you? What needs to happen to our country to heal? To begin our program, I would like to introduce Miguel Flores. Mr. Flores wears many hats. He is Chief Executive Officer for Holistic Wellness and Counseling Services, Clinic Director of the Native Music Coalition Wellness Center, Chairman of Arizona Partnership for Native American Cancer Prevention, and Chairman, American Indian Research Center for Health. Mr. Flores will open our program with a blessing. Mr. Flores.
Thank you. Los Muchañovo, Malia, Gustash, Buenos tardes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here this evening to start off your wonderful event with a blessing on this day of healing. So with your permission, I'd like to offer this blessing of the four directions. Señorita Macha Ata, we come in from a manner. And we thank you for this new day of life which blessed upon us. We thank you for the morning trophy, the morning star. We thank you for the light that you give. We thank you for the warmth that you give. We thank you for that sacred fire inside our hearts. We thank you for the elements of the south, Father. We thank you for the warm rains which bring away, for the rains that bring life, the rains that bring growth, the rains that cleanse us and heal us. We thank you for our inner peace, our inner calmness, our inner child. We thank you for the elements of the West. We thank you for those ancestors that passed on before us. We ask them to give us their guidance, their strength, wisdom, and courage. We thank you for the elements of the North. We thank you for the cold winds which bear away the white snows. We thank you for the endurance which you have teach us. We thank you for the lessons of life and death which you teach. We ask you to help us spiritually, physically, and mentally, to take away any impurities, any toxins that would lie within us. We ask you to bless us from top of our head to bottom of our feet. We ask prayers for all people, all nations, as we heal together as one, that we come together with open eyes, open ears, to be able to hear our words of wisdom, words of courage, our stories, our songs, the lessons that we have learned throughout time, but that we might make this up a better place to live for all people and all nations. Once again, we thank you for these gifts and we thank you for these relatives that are gonna present this evening. So listen, chokotesi itamachaata. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flores. Our first and youngest speaker is Jada Griffith. She's a 16-year-old junior at Saguaro High School. Her favorite subject is English. Ms. Griffith, what does racial healing mean to you, and what can we do to promote racial healing?
So to me, the National Day of Racial Healing is a day for people of all races, ethnicities, and nationalities, anything really to understand one another and appreciate our differences so we can come together in a really humanistic and open manner in order to reconcile racial divides and make progress toward a more equal and healed society.
Thank you. Did you have something else to say?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. And as far as what I think needs to happen for racial healing in this country, I would say there is a common misconception about racism, and it's that it exists today largely on an individual scale. Basically, that it's up to every person alone not to be racist, and society as a whole cannot change one person or 20 people's opinions about it. That's obviously not true, because racism has mostly been reformed on the individual level with the removal of past racist policies and laws. But as we can see, it's not enough to truly combat racism in the US. And there are things that still have large influence today, like the systems that run the society. It's because of that that I believe we need to acknowledge the institutionalized racism of America and take action to reform it in order for the country to really heal. And when I say institutionalized racism, or you can call it systematic racism, I mean the racism that is woven into the formations of societal structures. So things like education, religion, employment, healthcare, racism has origins in all of these things. And as long as these past attitudes remain in the structure of the world today, we can't heal and we can't move forward. So we need to build a society where people, particularly, especially those of color, are not touched by the origins, and they don't hinder their success in any aspect or areas of life. So healing would mean that living in that society where you can't change all the years of history, of course, but you're not living in a world that's so heavily tainted by it. And that's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Griffith. Very wise words. Thank you. Our next speaker is Alton Zhang. Mr. Zhang is a junior at the University of Arizona, majoring in aerospace engineering. Mr. Zhang, your views on racial healing and what we can do.
Well, I just want to start off and thank the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson so much for setting up an amazing event. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for inviting us to speak on this important panel. What does it mean to us? It means a lot. As the youth of the nation, we have to hold the burdens of what the past generations have given us. And unfortunately, those burdens aren't always the easiest to handle. The National Day of Racial Healing is important for us because it allows us to have an important conversation with the rest of America. How do we move on? Now, the National Day of Racial Healing started 6 years ago and was placed right after Martin Luther King Jr. Remembrance Day. And that was for a very important reason. Martin Luther King Jr. was an amazing man by all respects. I hold him in high regards. At the height of racial division and hatred, he stood up for what was important. He fought, he marched for a day where one day his 4 little children could live in a nation where they will not be judged by the content, by the skin of their color, but by the content of their character. And because of his sacrifices, his amazing legacy, we have to push forward. We have to move forward. And that is why the National Day of Racial Healing is placed right after MLK Remembrance Day, to whip us into action, to do something that actually matters. So the question is this: are we working towards a country that King would be proud of? Have we made a country where all of God's children be able to sing with new meaning, "From every mountainside, let freedom ring"? Unfortunately, we haven't made it there yet. We've come far in a lot of aspects, but there are still people in this country who want to segregate us, divide us, to fulfill their own vile agenda. So what will it take for a country to heal? I'll be honest with you, it's not an easy problem. And if it was, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today, and you wouldn't be here. But hopefully, I can guide us towards the right direction. In my opinion, the problem stems from the overpoliticization of race in this country. There's a group of people in this country who believe that everything about you can be boiled down to the color of your skin, that they believe that you're not an individual, but merely just another member of some racial group who will act, behave, and be a certain way. A group of people who want to gatekeep cultures, acting as the arbiters of what's allowed and what isn't in this country. And I'm tired of those people. People who make racial politics the focal point of their identity. How can you heal our nation, like a nation's societal divide, if all you ever present to society is a divisive perspective? People are more than their skin color. People are more than just ethnic groups. We're individuals, people with hopes and dreams. And as redundant as that may sound, it is something that we've forgotten as a nation. As a kid, I didn't know what race was. I knew vaguely that I was Chinese, and I had an implicit understanding of that was something different. And the first time I got bullied, that view of the world went down the drain. I was called Chink, Ching Chong, small eyes, and that was hurtful to me. Honestly, I still think about it a lot to this day. Up until that point, I'd never understood the concept of racial consciousness, but after that, I was forced to see the racial differences. And suddenly, I understood why people were so biased, so hateful, and why they hung on to their stereotypes and prejudices. It made sense now. When I look out in this crowd, I don't see people of varying races, creeds, and backgrounds. I see fellow Americans staring back at me. We may not be able to unlearn the way that we see each other, but we can change the way that we internalize it within ourselves. Instead of looking for ways to divide ourselves into smaller and narrower groups, let's look for what we can be united in. We're all Americans, and we were born with God-given rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We were all created equal under God, and I hope that people can recognize that once again. Every change begins here. We can heal our broken nation if we begin to work on ourselves. And I know that that's not exactly the easiest solution. And I know that it might not be the most apparent, but if you want to be the change you want to see in the world, you have to start with yourself. So, unfortunately, healing can't just happen on a single day of national healing, but it is a mountain that we're going to have to chip away at, bit by bit, rock by rock, and one day we'll have the stone of hope that MLK fought so valiantly for. Thank you guys so much for a wonderful night, and I hope that you take something away from this.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those remarks. Our next speaker is Rodrigo Guerrero. He is a senior at the University of Arizona pursuing dual Bachelor of Arts degrees in philosophy, politics, economics, and law, and information science and arts. Mr. Guerrero, your views, what can we do? What does it mean? What needs to happen?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this event and providing me with a platform to share my thoughts. So first, addressing that first question that was asked is, what does the National Day of Racial Healing mean to you? And in this case, we're talking about me. So for me, I find this day and its efforts to be a little bit lost in the project of social justice. And I kind of want to provide a little bit of context for that claim. Another panelist brought this up. The National Day of Racial Healing was begun in January of 2017. And that day was just one of many events that are centered around social justice, which started that same month. Many of them, like the National Day of Racial Healing, have become annual events. And though the direction and purpose of those events have changed since their inception, it's impossible to ignore that nearly all of these events are direct responses to the inauguration of Donald Trump that same month. I doubt that any of these events or their organizers would explicitly admit this fact, either in 2017 or now, but I think they're nonetheless tied to the beginning of the Trump administration. As such, I think the day faces a bit of an issue. Being an event which seeks to heal the racial divides in our country, it seems a bit unrealistic to think that they can have any real impact when it is by definition a partisan response. Namely, most of these social justice events are responses of dissatisfied Democrats and liberals to the inauguration of another racist Republican president, Donald Trump. So to me, the National Day of Racial Healing is another addition to this growing compendium of non-substantive days, where we have people who are overwhelmingly liberal patting themselves on the back for having, quote, the tough conversations, while all the while deriding conservatives for their overt racism, rightly so, and subsequently creating a false dichotomy, a dichotomy where the white liberal believes that it's the conservative who is the overt racist and that thus they cannot be themselves. I think this is unproductive, and it's an unproductive approach to racial healing because, in fact, it requires reflection of all parties to understand what our issues are. And what I want to bring up here is that though I would not, I'd be remiss to not point out that we're existing in a bit of an echo chamber here. Because as I said earlier, this day is largely a partisan response, and by virtue of being a partisan response, has alienated an entire swath of the population from the conversation, and as such has created an echo chamber. Now, I know my perspective on what this day means to me may be a bit more doom and gloom than people are looking for, but I do think there is hope in how to move forward and what can be done to heal the nation. As I believe, and I believe many others do as well, the solution to racial healing is to eliminate the very circumstances which have brought us to this point, and that's racism itself, both interpersonal and institutional. Now, I strongly believe that the culture of ending racism can emerge from the intersection of moral knowledge, of an increase of general benevolence for one another, which can be derived from sympathy, and just increased security for all. I believe that a large and uncomfortable fact for why we're at the present time in racial relations is that most people do not treat others as equals because they do not see one another as equals. And in our crusade to eliminate racism, if we're to suggest to people who are racist to treat those people that they have a distaste for as if they are human, is in and of itself a great offense to them. So then how do we increase this moral knowledge, increase the benevolence for others, and increase security, as I say that we need to do? I argue that the horse of security is what pulls the carts of moral knowledge and benevolence. For much of human history, little headway has been made in rights. However, the culture of rights has exploded within the last 2 centuries, largely because of economics prosperity. As people can shift their focus away from their desire for just mere survival, they can begin engaging and cultivating moral knowledge, learning of the experiences of others, and subsequently gaining sympathy for their fellow humans and understanding that the moral ills of racism aren't acceptable. But to achieve that level of security requires a great challenge. The means to achieve that end of security is greatly debated and will likely continue to be debated for the foreseeable future. But it seems clear that it requires a restructuring of our economic systems and attitudes to prioritize the security of individuals above all else. People will not be willing to lend a hand to others who are not viewed well in this country if they do not feel that they themselves are being treated with respect. So really, just to summarize my thoughts, to heal from racism, we must eliminate racism. But to eliminate racism, we can only do so by educating the population. The challenge lies in what people cannot afford, which is education in many cases. Whether it's the opportunity cost, the financial cost of education, one way we can mitigate that is by making sure that people feel secure in the situation that they have. And to ensure individual security, we must restructure our economic systems to do just that. I know it is a difficult prescription, but I do believe that it is a necessary one in order for our nation to heal.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Lots to think about. Introducing now Corey Roberts. Corey Roberts is a doctoral student at the University of Arizona Department of Linguistics. He is of Occaneechi, Tuscarora, and African American heritage. He works in conjunction with 5 tribes on revitalizing Tutelo, the ancestral language of several southeastern Siouan peoples. Mr. Roberts, what is racial healing? What can we do as individuals, as a people, to heal?
Wasahin Bialauk, League of Women Voters, Bila Uk. Greetings, everyone. And thank you to my fellow speakers, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for the creation of this event. So the first prompt, what does the National Day of Racial Healing mean to me? I'm going to set aside the national for a moment. And I'm going to say that rather than healing, I'm going to use the word reconciliation. Now, for those of you who remember peace and reconciliation committees in South Africa and other places, that's not exactly what I mean here. I believe that memory is a precious thing, and it goes above and beyond the bounds of what you may have experienced in this lifetime, however long that may have been. Memory is something that goes farther back. Memory of our parents and our parents' parents and their parents before them. Those memories are contained in our blood, in our bone, in our flesh, and our sinew, down to our very DNA. In science, they call it epigenetics, but it's what many people have known for a long time. And so on that note, for me personally, I can say that I have the memories of people who enslaved my ancestors, and I have the memories of the people who were enslaved. I have the memories of people who raided and pillaged and those who were raided and pillaged from. I have the memories of people who are on both sides of the same wars, and some who did not even know that they were involved in wars that were happening around them. And I have the blessing and the challenge of perhaps knowing a little bit more about those histories than maybe a few other people out there. But regardless of whether we know them on a conscious level or not, I believe that those memories are flowing in my blood. They are living in my tissues, in my very DNA. And so what does that make a day of racial healing look like? It makes it look like any day, because every single day, whether it's on a conscious level or unconscious or subconscious, it is something that I reconcile every day. I experience this reconciliation all the time. And I believe that many of us also are experiencing this reconciliation, that we're not necessarily engaging in it. And so what would it take for this to be a national day of healing? It would be for us to reconcile with our histories, those memories that live in our blood, our bone, our flesh, and our very DNA. Now, that sounds really lofty. And so I'll turn to the second prompt, which is what needs to happen for our country to heal? I think it's a very simple process, actually. Simple, not easy, but very simple. It starts with sitting with ourselves and laying bare the stories that we tell ourselves about race. Those things that we may say only in certain company, or those things that we say quietly to ourselves, or may not say out loud at all. Go ahead and say them. Don't make them pretty. Use words that are very plain, not necessarily offensive, not trying to be offensive. Just say them for what they are. The next step in that process would be to say that story, those stories out loud to someone who does not look like you, who does not come from the same blood, bone, sinew stories that you do. The next to the last step in this process is, after you have said these things, to listen to whatever it is that they have to say. And do not interrupt, do not clean things up, do not edit. Just sit there, be quiet, pay attention, and listen. Then the final step in this process would be to repeat often. Pay attention to how your stories change. Pay attention to the reactions of people. And pay attention to the feelings that come up for you as you sit there and be quiet and hear what these stories do for other people. You might want to jump in there and say, no, 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 that's not what I meant. Or no, this is what I'm doing here. Or you might be looking for that pat on the back. That's not what healing is about. Healing is about getting down to the blood and bone, to the ugliest parts of the history, and to the beautiful parts as well, so that the beauty can arise from it. I think that process, simple, not easy, if we all engaged, would help us make great strides in healing race in this country and in this world.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. And thank you to all of our speakers for sharing your views, reminding us what racial healing means and what needs to happen. Having open eyes and ears, seeing, hearing others, understanding, learning, appreciating, and honoring our differences, having conversations, being seen as an individual and accepting others as individuals. Hope and moving forward so that we're just not lost in the doom and gloom. Memories, a reconciliation, the stories we tell ourselves and others, listening to others' stories, paying attention. Thank you. Things we can do as an individual, as a group, sharing our stories honestly, openly, and listening honestly and openly, and getting to know one another as a person, not just a color or an ethnicity. Thank you. I want to thank you also to the people who were behind the scenes from the DEI Racial Healing Committee, whose work made this possible, who contacted you and who worked on all of it. Adrian Barton, Sharon Bigot, Muriel Bothwell, Victor Boleg, Jeremy Brittle, Marty Cortez, Nancy and Neil Norton, Kate Stewart, Judy Wood. Thank you to all the speakers and all the people who worked to put this together. And I just want to say also, if you're not a member of the League of Women Voters, I'm extending a personal invitation to you to join and become an active member. You can go on the website LWVTucson.org and get lots of information on activities and programs. The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee will also be hosting a program on February 19th with national speakers on truth, racial healing, and transformation. Please put that on your calendar. Saturday morning, February 19th, 10 o'clock. I hope to see you then. This is not the destination. Racial healing is a journey. We're on a journey. Please continue the process of being on that journey. And thank you for all of your input. Our closing speaker is Rabbi Thomas Lochheim of Congregation Kolame. Rabbi?
I want to thank all of our speakers who brought to us the possibilities for a better future for all of us. Thousands of years ago, God called forth a single man to protect the rights of a discriminated race of people. From Egypt to Sinai, those former slaves learned a lesson that unfortunately seems to have to be retaught in every generation since. Moses and those former slaves figured out something that had never been imagined before. Amidst the terrifying confusion and chaos of their time, they affirmed that human beings are not just animals, but something much more. To be human is to have a soul. And by virtue of that soul, we are able to live with conviction and courage. We look to God in heaven for guidance, and we are centers of moral power in our world. After Moses became reconciled to his dying many years later, the Holy One, blessed be God, kissed him and took away his soul. And God wept and cried out, "Who will rise up against the wicked? Who stands up for me against the evildoers?" God cried. "Who will stand up for my innocent children when they are attacked by their enemies? Who will entreat mercy on their behalf when they sin before me?" The Holy Spirit said, "There has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses." And the angels of heaven wept and said, "And the upright among is no more, and many have tried to stand up against ignorance and violence." And in our generation, the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King was heard as it reverberates in our moral soul. And he said, "An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity." And he continued and said, "Rarely do we find men who willingly engage in hard and solid thinking. There is an almost universal quest for easy answers and half-baked solutions. Nothing pains some people more than having to think," he concluded. So tonight, let his love of life and his anguish at the violence around him stir our souls from our silent places. In a world of enormous suffering and injustice, we must be the ones who answer heaven's claim that the upright among is no more. And how do we answer the psalmist who asked, "Who will rise up for me against the wicked? Who stands up for me against the evildoers?" Dear God, let us be the ones who live with conviction and courage. Let us be like our speakers tonight, the ones who engage in hard and solid thinking to find possibilities. Tonight, they have answered the call of the psalmist, as they have made the commitment to rise up against the wicked. Let us join them and profess the truth with our lips. And then and only then will we create moments of justice, beauty, and decency wherever we dwell. We are the ones to bring healing and love. Let us have the audacity to say, "I will stand up." Eternal God, we are amply blessed. We dedicate ourselves to bring blessing to those in need. Help us to know that we cannot have joy, peace, and contentment if others do not have hope. Let us open hearts to hope. This is our vision, as it has been throughout the ages. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Lockhart. I have one more thank you. Thank you to each of you who watched this program today. Perhaps, no, it is my hope, it is my prayer that it will inspire all of us to consider what we can do for racial healing, to be present, to have racial healing present in our own corner of the world. As a reminder, today's program will be posted on the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson website within a week. Tell your friends. LWVTucson.org. Goodbye for now. Thank you to all. Stay safe.